You know, when we think about our homes, our minds usually go to the roof, the windows, maybe the foundation, but way up top, there's this unsung hero, a critical piece of protection that most of us completely overlook, the chimney crown. So today we're going to get into what this thing is, why it fails, and exactly what you can do to make sure this silent guardian stays on the job.
So, what is it exactly? Well, the easiest way to think about it is like a personal little roof, just for your chimney. It's that slab of concrete or mortar you see at the very top. And its entire purpose in life is to act as a shield, making sure rain, snow, and whatever else falls from the sky gets diverted away from the inside of your chimney structure.
It's such a simple idea, right? But it's an incredibly powerful defense, which leads to the big question. What happens when that shield starts to crack and fail? Because believe me, the consequences can get way more serious and a lot more expensive than you'd probably guess.
Yeah, let's be really clear about this. This is not just some decorative piece. The crown is the absolute first line of defense your chimney has against the weather. When it's doing its job, it stops water from seeping into the brick and mortar, which is what leads to all the nasty stuff, like structural decay and water damage showing up inside your house.
Okay, so since it's so important, how can you even tell if yours is in trouble? Let's dive into spotting those warning signs, what you should be looking for, and maybe even more importantly, what's causing the damage to happen in the first place.
All right, the number one villain here is something called the freeze-thaw cycle. Just picture this. A little bit of water seeps into a crack that's almost too small to see. That night, the temperature drops, the water freezes, and it expands. It acts like a tiny little wedge, pushing that crack open just a little bit wider. Now imagine that happening hundreds of times over a few winters, and suddenly that tiny flaw is a major problem. Then, of course, you've got other culprits, like a poor construction job from the get-go, or some big event, like a chimney fire.
So what are the actual red flags? Well, the obvious ones are visible cracks, or if you can see the edges of the concrete crumbling. But the signs can also show up inside your house. See any water stains in your firebox or on the walls around the chimney? That's a huge clue. Even something like moss growing on top is a bad sign. It means water is just sitting there instead of draining off like it's supposed to.
And this is the main takeaway here, really. Don't blow off the small stuff. Even a tiny hairline crack is basically an open door for water to get in. Catching these things early is absolutely the key to avoiding a much bigger headache down the road.
All right, so you've spotted a problem. Now what? Well, you're kind of at a crossroads. Is this something you can just repair? Or are we talking about a complete rebuild? It really all comes down to how bad the damage is.
The decision is actually pretty straightforward. You can usually get away with a repair if you're dealing with fairly minor issues. You know, a few small cracks, a little surface wear, but the overall structure is still solid. But if you're seeing deep, wide cracks or the concrete is literally flaking and crumbling away, well, that's when you got to bite the bullet and go for a full rebuild.
So let's actually look at what's involved in those two different paths. What does it take to either repair it or rebuild it and get that shield back into fighting shape?
A repair is a pretty methodical process. First, everything gets a deep clean to make sure you have a good surface to work with. Then, those little hairline cracks get filled with a special sealant. Any bigger cracks get patched up with a heavy-duty mortar. But honestly, the most crucial part is that final step, coating the whole thing with a flexible, waterproof membrane. That's what really locks the moisture out.
Now a rebuild, that's a whole other level. The old damaged crown gets completely demolished and removed. Then a form is built, often with steel rebar inside for reinforcement, kind of like a mini foundation. A brand new weather-resistant concrete mix gets poured. But check out step 4, because this is the really clever part. A pro will shape the crown with a slight slope and what's called a drip edge. It's this little overhang that forces rainwater to drip off and away from the chimney bricks, instead of just running down the side and soaking in. It's a tiny detail that makes a massive difference in the long run.
Okay, so whether you've done a repair or a full rebuild, the job isn't quite finished yet. The next step is all about fortifying that defense and making sure your new investment is going to last for years to come. And let me be crystal clear on this. Sealing the crown with a professional-grade waterproofing agent is not some optional upgrade. It is an absolutely essential final step. It creates this tough, invisible barrier that keeps water out, but it's also breathable, which is key, because it lets any moisture that's already in the masonry escape.
And the payoff for taking that final step? It's huge. A properly applied sealant can easily add 10 or more years to the life of your chimney crown. It's a really small investment that basically stops that destructive freeze-thaw cycle dead in its tracks.
And to keep that protection going strong, a little bit of maintenance goes a very long way. It's a great idea to have it checked out once a year, especially after a tough winter. Keep it clear of any leaves or debris that can trap moisture. And I mean this, please be safe. Getting up on a roof is no joke. It's always the best call to have a pro handle inspections and repairs.
So we'll end on this thought. Your chimney crown works silently, day in and day out, protecting your home. But it can't last forever without a little bit of help. The real key here is to be proactive. So ask yourself, is your chimney's first and most important defense actually ready for the next storm?